people that hadn't met that, I called her U.S. Senator. Obviously, I didn't talk to him, I talked to one of his assistants, explaining what was wrong with that, and he basically was telling me I didn't understand. Until I told him my mother was killed by an illegal. And he listened a little bit more, but I don't think anything ever come of it. So that was difficult, you call up the U.S. Senator's office.
And here's the thing, they may agree with you, but because everything they do is politically motivated, they don't want to make hard decisions. They either have to toe the party line, or they don't get reelected. They don't get the money to support their reelection campaign. And, back in the day, anybody could run for office now. You better be backed by a whole bunch of multimillionaires or you can't run. Even at the state level, you can't run. Oh, you can, trying to get elected. So, it's hard to do that one time. Alice and I were talking about somebody we know, and I had this situation with someone else many years ago, of people not wanting to take responsibility, being afraid to say, I don't know, being afraid to take responsibility. So when I was assigned to the embassy in Paris, we had a new military attaché. He was a 2-star general, and he came in, and I was, at that time, I was seconded to the CIA, and so there was a dinner party, and I was supposed to brief him, and I go in and I say, sir, I'm an intelligence agent, and I'm supposed to tell you these things about everyone that's coming to the party. And he's like, I don't need some low-level person, and of course he knew I was military, no junior person to tell me what to do. I said, sir, that's my job, to tell you what their strong points are, what their weak points are, things you should talk about, things you should, and here's a list of things you need to try and find out from them, in conversation. And he refused to listen to it. He didn't last very long there, because he didn't realize his job was to stand up for the government, not just to drink and eat canapes or whatever they did. So anyway, so let's look at verses 1 through something. I don't remember, but anybody want to read, Brian? Thank you.
When Mordecai learned all that had been done, he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, and went into the midst of the city and wailed loudly and bitterly.
Now, let's pause here for a second. We'll talk more in depth in a minute, but you notice he's automatically taking a very dangerous stand. Because what's the point of sackcloth and ashes?
Mourning.
It's mourning, but he's making an outward symbol of how horrible this is, and he's wailing out loud. I mean, you can't draw attention to yourself much more than that, walking through this city. Okay, go ahead, 2.
He went as far as the king's gate, for no one was to enter the king's gate clothed in sackcloth.
All right, stop again. Why don't they want anybody to come into the palace wearing sackcloth? And I can think of a couple of reasons. Politics hadn't changed at all in 4,000 years. Why don't they want someone to come in like that? What does that say?
Well, there's a problem they're faced with, and it could be related to the king.
So one, somebody's unhappy and we don't want to deal with it. Libby?
Disrespect.
Yeah, he has no respect for the king's authority, Carl.
They don't want the grubby peasants coming into the castle.
It looks bad. It looks bad. Yeah, there's a whole lot of reasons. All of them are vanity. None of them are, bring him in so we can find out what's going wrong, that he is doing this. It's, no, don't come into our castle looking this way. Okay, number 3, verse 3.
In each and every province where the command and decree of the king came, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting, weeping, and wailing, and many lay on sackcloth ashes.
Okay.
Then Esther's maiden and her eunuchs came and told her, and the queen writhed in great anguish, and she sent garments to clothe Mordecai, that he might remove his sackcloth from him, but he did not accept them.
Okay, so is her first response to this problem, her first response is she's in anguish, but then her reaction is, I need to get him out of sackcloth and ashes. So is her response responsible? Is it a fear response? What is it?
What's appropriate?
And why? Huh?
It's very appropriate.
You think so?
I do.
With concern for his welfare.
Or is she afraid that her husband, the king, is going to hear that her uncle is doing this? I mean, there could be a lot of things. It could be, she could have thought, man, he's running on hard times, he needs a new outfit. But the reality is, because the eunuchs and her maidens came and told her what's going on, her response is really, I think it's self-centered. I think it's, I don't want him to do this. And maybe she's afraid he'll be killed, but she could be afraid for her own safety. But the response is not what she's famous for later. And we'll get that. Keep going.
Oh, I had his hand up.
Oh, Carl, okay.
I'm drawing a blank on what I was gonna say.
Exactly.
You know, it may be also too because she just didn't want him drawing that much attention. You know, they were already pretty much given a death warrant. Now he's going and doing this and drawing more negative attention.
Mhm.
So again, she'd be afraid of that.
Right. Okay.
Then Esther summoned Hathach
Probably.
from the king's eunuchs, whom the king had appointed to her, and ordered him to go to Mordecai to learn what this was and why it was. So Hathach went out to Mordecai to the city square in front of the king's gate.
So no, she doesn't really know yet what's happening. Now we think, well, how could she not know she's the king's wife? How could she not know? Because women were treated very differently then. She's living in a cloister, probably. And we know she's not sharing a bedroom with the king, because she can't even go see him without permission. And she has eunuchs, so she's living in like a harem, a cloister, whatever you want to call it. All right, verse 7.
Mordecai told him that all that had happened to him and the exact amount of money that Haman had promised to pay to the king's treasurers for the destruction of the Jews. He also gave him a copy of the text of the edict which had been issued to Susa for their destruction, that he might show Esther and inform her, and to order her to go into the king to implore his favor, to plead with him for her people.
Okay, so we're at the point now where he sends word, you need to go talk to the king. And she's really excited and said, I'll be glad to, right? Next verse. Or next two, or a couple verses
All
here.
right. Hathach came back and relayed Mordecai's words to Esther. Then Esther spoke to Hathach and ordered him to reply to Mordecai.
I thought that verse was supposed to read, so she immediately jumped up and ran to the king and said, so this is what she tells her uncle Mordecai.
All the king's servants and the people of the king's province know that for any man or woman who comes to the king to the inner court who is not summoned, he has but one law, that he be put to death, unless the king holds out to him the golden scepter so that he may live. And I have not been summoned to come to the king for these 30 days. They relayed Esther's words to Mordecai.
You are almost done here.
Then Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, do not imagine that you in the king's palace can escape any more than the Jews. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise from the Jews from another place, and you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not attended royalty for such a time as this. Then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, go, assemble all the Jews who are found in Susa, and fast for me. Do not eat or drink 3 days, nights, for 3 days, nights, or day.
I and my maidens
I and my maidens also will fast in the same way. And thus I will go into the king, which is not according to the law. And if I perish, I perish. So Mordecai went away and did just as Esther
Commanded him. Sorry.
commanded him.
I got quick on the trigger. So she's, she goes back to him and says, I can't do this. And notice she hasn't seen her husband for 30 days. Also notice back, why is part of the reason that Xerxes is wanting to do this? He's wanting to pay. He's going to pay the king to let him kill all the Jews. And I do love, it's an important point for us that just because we pray for relief from something doesn't mean it's going to be the way we want the relief to come. Nobody said, oh, he'll save us. God will save us. But basically he was saying, but all of us here in this kingdom will probably die. But he will save the people. God is not going to let American politics destroy Christianity. God is not going to let world affairs destroy Christianity. Even if there's only a tiny remnant left, God will save, but it doesn't mean it'll be our way and to our comfort, to the things that make us happy. Alright? So, they respond by, answer the question, how did they respond? The Jewish people. How did they respond when they heard the king's edict, bow or die? What did Mordecai and all the other, or many of the other Jews do in the streets? Sackcloth, it said many of them were laying on sackcloths and ashes. They're making a public demonstration of their displeasure. So the question is, how do we respond when government or bosses or social norms or anything else tries to push us to do something that violates either our own conscience? Because what does the scripture say? If you believe it to be wrong, it's wrong. It can be something that, like Paul saying about eating meat that was sacrificed to idols, it can be okay biblically, but if you believe I would be wrong to do this, then don't do it. But anyway, so if it's something that violates your conscience, or if it directly violates a command of God, what should we do? Give me the minimum answer of what we should do.
Obey God rather than men.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Pray. Take a stand. Whatever. So the question is, how far would you go to do it? There's a young man named Rodney Evgeny, or Evgeny Radionov. He's a Russian soldier. That's his picture. He was baptized, and from the time he was baptized, he openly wore a cross outside of his clothing. His mother begged him to stop, because in Russia, well, we know. And so anyway, they sent him to fight, I don't remember if it's Afghanistan or somewhere. This is fairly modern when this happened, although the picture looks pretty old. It's a Russian picture. But he went to fight, and he was captured. He and some others were at a checkpoint. They were captured by these Muslim soldiers. They hold him for ransom. They kept him hanging by his wrists in a basement, starved and beaten for months. They sent word to his family that they would release him for 50 million rubles. Now, the Russian government, how much do they care about each individual soldier? Not at all. There's a cannon fodder. So, whatever that amount equals in money back in the 80s or whatever, his family didn't have that kind of money. Nowhere near it. So for 3.5 more months, they held him captive, hoping to get their money. Oh, I do have a note where it was. They're in Chechnya. And the Chechen Muslims told him over and over, daily, take off the cross and convert, and we will release you. I mean, they weren't going to get their money, so they're trying this. He refused take off the cross, deny your faith, and become a Muslim, and we will let you go. He refused. He suffered just indescribable torture at their hands, but he refused to deny the faith. In fact, he confirmed it. On his 19th birthday, they took a saw and sawed his head off. So, even, that's 1996. Even in today, there are still martyrs, people that are willing to stand up for their faith. Now, you can argue whether or not they're Christians by how we define it, but there's still people standing up for their belief in God and their belief in Christ. And it happens every year. Thousands of people are still dying. We are so, and I don't like to use the word blessed, we are so fortunate that we were born in this country where we can sit here openly, our cars in the parking lot, not afraid somebody will see us. When in many other places in the world, you can't do this. So that's how far he was willing to go. I know of another, and I don't remember his name, but another Russian soldier back in the 70s that he refused to take off his cross. His local commander was not a believer, and he forced him at first to stand guard duty for like 24 hours at a stretch and wouldn't let him eat, wouldn't let him leave his post. And then they made him start marching out in the cold, and then they started making him march with no coat in the freezing cold because he wouldn't deny his faith, and then they would wet him down and send him out in the cold, and he finally died of pneumonia. Again, trying to make him denounce Christ, and he refused. So, second question is, how did she find out? That was in verses 4 through 7.
Her maids told her.
Huh?
Her maids told her.
Her maids told her, right? They told her that Mordecai was in great distress. So he was, through Hathach, he was able to, we read this, to communicate to her. She's one of the eunuchs. Of course, the eunuch is going to be more faithful to her than he is the king. Not saying it's a bad thing, but he works for her. And to disobey her would have been his death. So he's being faithful to her. But it sounds like he really did like her because they made that trip back and forth to him. They took clothes and they came back and said, your uncle says this. And they went back, well, okay, you need to pray and fast. And she does that. What specifically did Mordecai, he asked her to do one thing. What was it? Go to the king. And beg for mercy, plead for your people. That seems like an easy thing to do. Of course, she says she can. Why again could she not do that? Unless you're summoned, you're dead. Unless you make a good enough reason that he gives you the golden scepter, or hands it to you and says you can speak. But do you think outside of God her reason would have been enough? Because she's saying, go back on your own edict. Which, if you remember, they had a law in their country that they could not, once a king made an edict, he could not cancel it. JC, and then Brian.
At this point, the king didn't know she was Jewish.
Correct. Which would have made it even weirder, wouldn't it? Why do you care about those people? But yeah, you're right. He didn't know yet. Brian?
And her fear is real because she has no idea if he would extend that to her or not.
Now, what happened that she became queen?
And his other wife killed her.
Because?
She ran when she wasn't supposed to.
No, she didn't go in when he commanded
That's
it.
right, she didn't go.
He was drunk, and I disagree with Bruce's kind of analogy of that the other Sunday or the other Wednesday night. She did not want to be paraded out. It's still my thought on that. But regardless, he said, you will come out and show how beautiful you are to all my friends at this party. And she said, I won't. And he had her killed. And that's why he sat down and said, bring me all the beautiful girls of the kingdom so I can choose them. There's actually a ruler in our world today that still does the same thing regularly. Who is that? Kim Jong-un. He every year brings the most beautiful Korean girls, and they live, huh?
Bill
Yeah, Bill Clinton, he said. But no, Kim Jong-un, he brings the most beautiful women in North Korea, and he chooses them to be his pleasure squad, he calls them. And his wife puts up with it. But anyway,
He did invent the hamburger.
that was Al Gore. Anyway,
No, but it's one of those things where that's what he tells his people. These really, really random things, like he invented the hamburger.
that is true.
He's done all of these great things. I'm the one that invented soccer. I'm the one that, and
Al Gore said the same thing. I invented the internet.
yes,
We had had the internet in the military for years before he said that. Anyway, okay, so how did he ultimately, what phrase did he say that convinced her she should do it? And I really believe it was that one short statement. What was it? If you're not sure, look at verses 13 and 14.
You may have been brought up for such a time as this.
Yeah, typically we'll say, who knows that you weren't born for a day such as this? That's close. It's not quite exactly right, but you're correct, Karen. It's who knows, but that you have come to your position, royal position, for such a time as this. And so we can relate it to ourselves. No, we can relate that to ourselves. Who knows if you haven't been born to do this one thing at such a time as this, to stand up for this truth or that truth? Who knows? You don't know that God's not using you. So what is our response to that? If I don't know whether or not God's using me in a circumstance, what should my thought process still be?
You assume he is, and you won't record it.
Should still be, we're all assuming it's biblical, it's godly, whatever. But you should still look at it and say, whether God has specifically called me for this moment, I need to do the right thing. Again, flat tire might be a flat tire and not mean anything, but who knows but what you weren't raised up for this moment in time. I'll be very honest. I get frustrated like anybody else. I get, I've been here 20 years and I get frustrated in the job sometimes. And Allison, when I get depressed, Allison will remind me very often, she goes, we have made a difference. This is what we were always planning to do. It was the right decision. It has been costly financially. It's been costly, obviously it destroyed my career, which was on the rise. Things like that. But it was the right thing to do for the right reason. Allison still says I would have killed myself, but anyway. Yes, I was frustrated with that job too. I was in the longest running war in American history. I was tired of it. But anyway. So, who knows but what you've not been raised up for this. So if you look at something and say it's the right thing to do, then do it. Regardless of whether you think God has called you for that, regardless of whether you think I was born only for this. And remember, if you don't, God's still going to get his way. But which would you rather stand in front of him and say, I went ahead and did it, God, or would you rather say, I didn't want to do it, I was scared? I'd rather say I went ahead and did it, because it seemed like the right thing. So, we're just like Esther. We had been plucked out of obscurity to be a child of God. And we have a place in his palace, right? Revelation. We have a kingdom. Like Esther, we have royal robes because we are a royal priesthood. Right. We are dressed in God's righteousness, Christ's righteousness. And we have the privilege of making our requests known before God. We can talk to God one-on-one. Just yesterday, something was on my mind. I was praying about it. It was one of those times when I just had a conversation with God. I wasn't in here on my knees. I've done that before. I was sitting at my desk, sitting at home, I think it was last night. Anyway, a very long conversation with God because I just didn't know the answer to something. And I wanted, I was just asking, please answer this for me. Please make this so that I can know what the right answer is on this. And sometimes we have to do that. Regularly we need to do that. I think even if you know the right answer, it never hurts to say, God, make sure I know if that's an open door or not. Because the answer may not be not today, but tomorrow. Or it could be a kick in the pants to say you should have done it yesterday. But you can go ahead and do it today. You know. So, how has the Holy Spirit, like Mordecai in this passage, guided you at some point in doing what's right? How is some way that you have known this is what I need to do?
I think we've always got to be open to looking for the signs that are there. Because if we're not always aware and looking for them, we miss them. You know, and so it's being alert, going with the prayers, going to the Bible, reading it and learning, so that we can be aware. Otherwise, we can miss it.
So I had a funny one Monday. Wasn't it Monday, Allison, yeah. So Monday I was here working, and I didn't have any lunch here with me, and I didn't want to leave. I was busy. So I called Domino's or Pizza Hut or somebody and said, bring me a small pizza. Which was fine, except that when I thought it was time for them to come, I got that text message that says they're on their way. I went out the back door, and sitting by the back door are 2 homeless people. Right here. I said hi and stepped back in the building, and the first thought to my mind was not as Christian as it should have been. It was, am I going to have to give them my pizza? I'm hungry. And then I thought, you big dummy, you got a car, you got money, you can go get something else. And so I ran downstairs, and I got a bag full of food for them, stuff because I made the assumption they were homeless because they were dirty and smelly, very unkempt. And I thought, probably. So I got them things they didn't have to cook. And I filled a big bag, and I ran back out, and I went out to do it, and I was going to give them half my pizza. I was going to share and give them other food too. And they had left. So what turns out it was, because I checked our video cameras, they were sitting there while they were waiting for their friend to go to what is under investigation, a drug house very close to here. And I checked the cameras, their friend was over there, and I'm assuming buying drugs, and they came back and they all left. So had I known ahead of time they were buying drugs, should I still have reached out and given them food? Definitely should have made the offer. Why? Because who knows if that isn't the one thing in their lives that will make them think about changing. Was I wrong for having hesitated, or did I make it right when I set my mind that I'm going to do the right thing regardless? We all hesitate sometimes.
And hesitation isn't always wrong. It's sometimes cautious. Or it's sometimes thoughtful. Is this the right thing to do? It's not always bad to hesitate. As I am reminded by certain people, don't just react. Hesitate.
One night, Allison and I saw a older teenage girl walking on a country road. We had just left their house when they lived on Barberry. Girl's walking, her car's on the side of the road with the flashers on. So we stopped to help her. We called the non-emergency number and said, this person's car's in the ditch. I just want you to know, because it's still partially on the roadway, so nobody will hit it. Okay, we'll send somebody out. Where's the person? I said, we have them. We're going to take them home. My wife and I, it was very clear. My wife and I are taking this young girl home. And the girl was pretty nervous about getting the car with us, but I think because Allison was talking to her, she got in the back of the van and went. But we got a phone call quickly after. And what did your son say, who was on duty that night, Allison?
Pick up, you pull off the side of the road.
Have you lost your mind? You don't pick up, you don't know if somebody wouldn't have come out of the cornfield and grabbed you? What are you doing? I would still do it again. Here's a young parent, and if we get robbed or something, we get robbed. But I'm still going to do the right thing for someone who can't defend themselves, in my mind. A young girl, that's just a bad situation for this young girl to be on a country road at night. I hesitated when I saw her. I actually passed her for a second and then pulled over quick, because you do think about the danger of things. We still need to do the right thing. Don't take a stupid chance with your life for no reason. I'm not suggesting going downtown, or I'm not going to tell you where, but walking into the drug house near here and saying, I'm here to preach Jesus, I'm not suggesting that,
But we
But-
should not.
huh?
But we should not.
We should not?
Yeah, knock on the door.
No, but we should take the opportunity, like they were sitting there, I still would have given them the food had they still been there. Even if I had known, I would still offer them food. So anyway, anybody else want to share something on seeing God guiding you to do something? Brian?
It's interesting because 90%, 99% of the time, when something happens in this way to me, I don't see it until I'm playing Monday morning quarterback. You know what I mean? I don't see it until after it's done. And that's when I can really analyze where my heart is when I'm helping people.
That goes to Patty's thing of being open to it, and you get quicker at recognizing what you should do with practice. Now, I know some of you grew up like I did. What? Carl had a question, comment? Go ahead.
I had a situation when my mom was going terminal. And we came up here to basically spend a little bit of time with her while she still could. And then went back home to Georgia. And I know she only had a couple, 2-3 months left. I could not stay down there. I knew I had to come back up here and be with her. I would have had to live with myself if I wouldn't have done that. And she needed the help. And I knew it was gonna change my life. I didn't know how it was gonna change it, but I knew I'd never be the same afterwards. But God was telling me, this is what I had to do. He gave me the strength to do it. I don't regret it. I'd do it again if it was the same situation. But I couldn't have done it without God's help.
But you helped your mother,
Yes.
which is the right thing. But you also found a church family, and you've done a lot of good things for other people. And so God used that way more than just your moving.
Oh, yes.
He's used you. I grew up in a time and place in the church where we were taught the Holy Spirit existed only in the printed word. Now, my mother denies that, but I know what I heard in Bible class, or at least what I thought I heard. I have since decided it is just too obvious in my life that God moves us in. And I'm not saying, I talk about that small, still voice, but that voice is not actually a voice necessarily. The voice is looking out the door to see if your pizza's there and 2 people sitting on the sidewalk. But God puts things in our path. He says that very clearly throughout the New Testament. I'm going to tempt you. Not tempt you. I'm going to try you. Only the devil tempts us. I'm going to try you. I'm going to beat you down like gold that's being refined. Things like that. God works in our lives in a very real way. And however you want to say that, that's fine with me, but don't deny that God works in our lives. Allison?
Sometimes we don't see it when it's happening, but if you take a look back at your life and you can see where you were led one way or the other, now you didn't have to go that way, but you can look back and see where you were guided to be where you are now.
Absolutely.
And where the other path would have been.
And again, it might not have been a bad thing if you'd done something else, but usually it's a better thing.
I can't wait to die and go to heaven, and all the little pieces that I've touched, look to see how far the ripples went. You know what I'm saying? And when we make an impact in somebody's life, you don't know 3-4 generations down that something doesn't take place and it started with you. I can't wait to go up there and see, Brian actually got it right one time. Look at that. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I can't wait to see that.
I can't talk about most of the kids that we deal with, but y'all all know the twins.
That's exactly what I was gonna say.
Their life, well, you guys don't know them, but we had 2 twins here that were in foster care. They said the little boy would never speak, that he was incapable of really learning. And because we gave them love as a congregation and through believing the children, we gave them love and we put them in a nice, good foster home. He has flourished and he is back on par with all of his other classmates. This was a child that school wrote off.
And parents and everybody else.
And everyone wrote off.
Even us to a degree.
And we did. But he has bloomed until It's amazing. Now, he goes backwards sometimes, but so do I. So do you. But yeah, it's amazing. We got 2 more minutes, right? Actually, probably not, but anyway. So, do we have a responsibility? Somebody turn over real quick to Proverbs 31, verses 8 and 9. Actually, no, because we're out of time, I'll read it to you. Speak up for those who cannot speak up for themselves, for the rights of all who are destitute. Verse 9, speak up and judge fairly, defend the rights of the poor and the needy. Speak up. Speak up, it says. So there is a danger when you speak up. And I'm going to read this poem to you, and you probably all know it. You probably all heard it. It's from a Lutheran preacher in the beginning of this was actually at the beginning of World War II. His name is Mark Niemöller. And he said, first they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unions, and I didn't speak out because I was not a trade union. Then they came for the Jews, and I didn't speak out because I'm not a Jew. Then they came for me, and no one spoke up because no one was left. Mark Niemöller was, as I said, a Lutheran minister, and he was in favor of Hitler's policies at the beginning of the war. This was before he saw so many people being interned in camp and all that. Once he realized what was going on, he started very publicly preaching and speaking out against Hitler, and he spent, if I remember right, he spent 8 years in a concentration camp because he spoke up. That's that thing, Brian, of looking back and saying, ooh, I should have gotten that hint faster. But as long in the end as we get the hint and do it right, we're okay. We're going to stop there. Next week, our Sunday call is going to continue in Esther chapter 5, I believe.
Yes.
And we'll go from there. We will have the handout Sunday morning on our pew back there. Thank you.